Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Like no matter what you do, you're somehow not good enough to be included in those precious moments captured in time? That was my reality for years. Every holiday season, every family gathering, there I was, behind the camera instead of in front of it. A convenient excuse, they said. Just a coincidence, they claimed. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't wanted in those perfect family portraits. So I did something about it. I built a life so extraordinary that my success became impossible to ignore, a framed achievement hanging right where they'd have to face it every single day. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. This is the story of how I turned exclusion into my greatest motivation, and how sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. It's making sure everyone who doubted you has a front row seat to your rise. Growing up in Oak Ridge, a small, suburban town in Pennsylvania, I was always the black sheep of the Mitchell family. The middle child of three, sandwiched between my older brother Derek and my younger sister Abigail. Both of them seemed to effortlessly embody everything our parents valued: academic excellence, athletic prowess, and most importantly, conformity to the Mitchell family image. Derek was the golden child, quarterback of the high school football team with a full scholarship to Penn State. Abigail was the perfect daughter, homecoming queen, straight-A student, and volunteer at the local animal shelter. And then there was me, Eliza Mitchell, with my sketchbooks full of strange drawings, my habit of asking uncomfortable questions at family gatherings, and my dreams of becoming a photographer that my father dismissed as an expensive hobby, not a real career. Our family dynamics weren't always this way. There was a time when I felt included, when my parents would proudly display my elementary school art projects alongside Derek's sports trophies. But something shifted when I turned 13. That year, I dyed a streak of blue in my hair, started wearing clothes from thrift stores instead of the preppy brands my mother preferred, and announced I wouldn't be trying out for cheerleading, like every other female Mitchell had for 3 generations. The changes were subtle at first. My mother would sigh heavily whenever I came downstairs in an outfit she didn't approve of. My father would make offhand comments about how I was going through a phase. But as the years passed, the distance grew. By the time I was 16, I had become accustomed to the feeling of being tolerated rather than celebrated. The first time I noticed I was being deliberately excluded from family photos was during our annual Thanksgiving gathering when I was 17. The entire extended Mitchell clan had descended upon our house: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone dressed in coordinating autumn colors as per my mother's detailed email instructions. I had reluctantly put on the burnt orange sweater she'd left on my bed, though I'd paired it with black jeans instead of the khakis she'd suggested. "Everyone gather in the living room for photos," my mother called out after dinner. I was helping my grandmother Caroline clear the table when I heard the announcement. By the time I made it to the living room, my family was already arranged in front of the fireplace, smiling widely. "Oh, Eliza," my mother said, looking up at me. "Would you mind taking the picture? You've got such a good eye for these things." Before I could respond, my father handed me his expensive camera. "Just press this button here and try to get everyone in the frame." I stood there for a moment, confused. "But don't you want me in the photo too?" "We'll take one with you after," my mother said dismissively. "We don't want to keep everyone standing around too long. Grandpa Mitchell's back is bothering him." So I took the photo, and another as they shifted positions slightly. Then my Aunt Meredith suggested they take one on the porch with the fall leaves in the background. And suddenly everyone was moving outside, and I was following with the camera, and somehow that promised photo with me never materialized. I told myself it was an oversight, a simple mistake in the chaos of a family gathering. But when the professionally printed Christmas cards arrived 3 weeks later, there was the Thanksgiving photo on heavy cardstock, "The Mitchell family gives thanks," embossed in gold script. beneath the image of my family, minus me. That Christmas was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. As we gathered to open presents on Christmas morning, my mother insisted on capturing the moment. "Derek, can you set up the tripod?" she asked. "I want to get all of us together." Hope fluttered in my chest. All of us. I smoothed down my hair and adjusted my position on the couch. "Abigail, scoot closer to your father," my mother directed. "Derek, you stand behind them." Perfect. I waited for my instructions, but they never came. "Everyone say, 'Christmas joy,'" Derek called out from behind the camera. "Wait," I said, rising from the couch. "What about me?" My mother's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, honey, there's not really room for everyone in the frame with the tree. We'll take another one later without the tree." But later never came. And when the photo appeared in matching frames given to both my siblings the following year as Christmas gifts, I finally understood. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. The pattern continued through my final year of high school. Prom photos where I was conspicuously absent, because my mother didn't want to interrupt when my date and I were having such a good time talking to your friends. Family vacation shots where I was always the one who captured the moment so beautifully. The graduation ceremony where my father took photos of Derek congratulating me, of Abigail hugging me, of my grandparents standing proudly with me, but somehow, not a single photo of me with my parents. By the time I left for college, the small art school in New York that I'd chosen specifically because it was nothing like the prestigious universities the rest of my family had attended, I had accepted my position as family documentarian rather than participant. I threw myself into my photography studies, finding solace in the darkroom where I could control which images emerged from the shadows and which remained unseen. College was transformative. Away from the stifling expectations of Oak Ridge and the Mitchell family legacy, I flourished. My photography professors praised my unique perspective. I made friends who valued my quirks rather than trying to suppress them. And midway through, my sophomore year, I met Jackson Reynolds. Jackson was studying film production with dreams of becoming a documentary filmmaker. He had an easy confidence that I envied, moving through the world as if he had never questioned his right to take up space. We met in a visual storytelling class, paired together for a project documenting the changing face of Brooklyn neighborhoods. "Your eye for composition is incredible," he said after reviewing my portfolio. "You see things other people miss." "Thanks," I replied, unused to such straightforward praise. It comes from years of practice being the observer rather than the observed. Something in my tone must have revealed more than I intended, because Jackson gave me a curious look. "That sounds like there's a story behind it." Over coffee that turned into dinner that turned into a midnight walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, I found myself telling Jackson about the Mitchell family photos, about my systematic erasure from my family's visual history. "That's messed up," he said simply when I finished. "You know that, right?" I shrugged, trying to play it off as less significant than it was. "It's not that big a deal. Lots of people have worse family problems. The fact that worse things exist doesn't invalidate your experience," Jackson countered. "And for what it's worth, I'd want you front and center in any photo I was taking." That night marked the beginning of not just a relationship, but a profound shift in how I saw myself. Through Jackson's eyes, I began to recognize that my difference wasn't a flaw. It was my strength. My unique perspective, the very thing that had made me an outsider in my family, was what made me an exceptional photographer. As we neared the end of our junior year, an opportunity arose that would change the trajectory of my life. Professor Diana Lowry, a renowned photographer known for her stark black and white portraits of marginalized communities, announced a competitive summer internship assisting on her upcoming project documenting the lives of coal mining families in Appalachia. "You should apply," Jackson urged when I mentioned the internship posting. I hesitated. "The competition will be fierce. Half the department will be applying." "So?" Jackson raised an eyebrow. Your work stands out, Eliza, and you have something many of the others don't. You understand what it means to be overlooked. That perspective would be invaluable for a project like this. With Jackson's encouragement, I put together a portfolio of my best work, including a series of self-portraits I'd been working on privately. Images where I inserted myself into reimagined family photographs, sometimes as a shadowy presence on the periphery, sometimes as a distorted reflection, always present yet not fully seen. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Professor Lowry requesting an interview. And 3 days after that, I was offered the internship. The summer I spent traveling through small mining towns with Professor Lowry was grueling, heartbreaking, and the most professionally fulfilling experience of my life to that point. I watched how she approached subjects with respect and genuine curiosity, how she created safe spaces for vulnerability through her own openness, how she found beauty and dignity in lives that society had largely forgotten. You have a gift, Eliza, she told me one evening as we reviewed the day's shots. You can make people feel seen in a way that few photographers manage. It's not just about capturing their image, it's about capturing their essence. When I returned to New York for my senior year, I had not only a wealth of new technical skills, but a portfolio of work that had Professor Lowry's name attached to it, a connection that carried significant weight in the photography world. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What had started as a summer internship evolved into an ongoing mentorship as Professor Lowry invited me to assist on weekend shoots throughout my final year of college. Despite my growing success in school, my relationship with my family remained strained. I went home less frequently, and when I did, nothing had changed. The Christmas of my senior year was particularly painful. My mother had arranged for a professional photographer to capture the family in matching sweaters in front of the fireplace. Eliza, would you check if he's positioning the lighting correctly? My mother asked. With your expertise, you'll be able to tell. It was a new variation on an old theme, acknowledging my photography skills only as a means to exclude me from the actual photo. But this time, instead of quietly accepting my role, I spoke up. Actually, Mom, I'd like to be in the photo this time. A moment of uncomfortable silence followed. My father cleared his throat. The photographer only brought enough matching sweaters for 4 people. We didn't think you'd want to wear one anyway. They're not really your style. It's not about the sweater, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's about being included in family memories. My mother's tight smile didn't reach her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Eliza. You're in plenty of family photos. Name one from the last 5 years, I challenged. No one could, or would. I left the next morning, cutting my visit short by 3 days. On the train back to New York, I scrolled through the photos on my phone, images of Jackson and our friends, of Professor Lowry and our subjects in Appalachia, of the life I had built for myself outside the confines of Oak Ridge. Not a single recent photo included my family. That spring, as graduation approached, Professor Lowry approached me with an unexpected opportunity. The gallery that represented her work was planning a show featuring emerging photographers, and she had recommended me. They're particularly interested in your series on invisible presence, she explained. The self-portraits where you explore your relationship with visibility and family dynamics. I was stunned. The self-portrait series had been deeply personal work that I'd never intended for public display. I'm not sure I'm ready to share those, I admitted. Art that makes you uncomfortable is usually art worth sharing, Professor Lowry said gently. But it's your decision. Take some time to think about it. That night, I showed the complete series to Jackson for the first time. 23 images that documented my gradual erasure and my attempts to reclaim space within my family narrative. These are powerful, Eliza, he said quietly when he'd viewed them all. They tell a story that I think a lot of people will relate to. even if their experience isn't exactly like yours. But they're so personal, I protested. And what if my family sees them? Jackson took my hand. Maybe they should. Maybe seeing themselves through your lens is exactly what they need. After a week of deliberation, I agreed to include 5 of the self-portraits in the gallery show. The exhibit, titled New Perspectives, would open in June, featuring work from 8 emerging photographers alongside pieces from established artists like Professor Lowry. I didn't tell my family about the show. I wasn't ready for their dismissal, or worse, their disinterest. Instead, I channeled all my energy into preparing my work, graduating with honors, and beginning the daunting task of establishing myself as a professional photographer in a city overflowing with talent. The opening night of New Perspectives was a blur of unfamiliar faces, sophisticated art world chatter, and the surreal experience of watching strangers stand before my most vulnerable work, analyzing and interpreting my pain as if it were an intellectual exercise rather than lived experience. Your use of negative space is particularly evocative, one gray-haired man in expensive-looking glasses commented. The way you position yourself as simultaneously present and absent creates a powerful tension. I nodded and smiled, unsure how to respond to having my family trauma described as an effective artistic choice. It was halfway through the evening when Jackson, who had been circulating through the crowd, returned to my side with an odd expression on his face. "Don't freak out," he said in a low voice, "but there's someone here to see you." I followed his gaze across the gallery to where a familiar figure stood examining one of my photographs, the one titled Holiday Erasure, which showed a Christmas scene with the faint outline of my silhouette cut out of the family group, leaving a transparent void in the center of the frame. Professor Lowry was speaking animatedly to the visitor, gesturing toward where Jackson and I stood. As they turned in our direction, I felt my breath catch. It was Derek. My brother looked out of place in the gallery, his broad shoulders and conventional good looks at odds with the artistic crowd. But what struck me most was his expression as he approached, a mixture of discomfort and something I couldn't quite identify. Shame, perhaps? Or regret? Surprise, he said weakly when he reached me. I saw an article about the show in the arts section of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Your name was mentioned as one of the emerging talents to watch. I thought I should come see what all the fuss was about. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Derek had never shown any interest in my photography before, had never made the 2-hour trip from Philadelphia, where he now worked at a financial firm, to visit me in New York, had never acknowledged that my hobby might be a legitimate career path. "What do you think?" I finally managed to ask, gesturing toward my photographs. Derek's eyes darted back to Holiday Erasure, then to the floor. "They're intense. Is that really how you see us? How you see yourself in the family?" "It's how I've felt," I answered honestly. "Especially during the holidays. I never realized," he began, then stopped. "I mean, I noticed you weren't in a lot of the photos, but I thought it was because you were always the one taking them, because you loved photography." The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed. I do love photography, but that doesn't mean I wanted to be excluded from every family memory. Derek winced. "When you put it like that, it sounds terrible." "It felt terrible," I said simply. We stood in uncomfortable silence, the buzz of the gallery continuing around us. Finally, Derek spoke again. "Your work is really good, Eliza. Not that I know much about art, but these photos make me feel something. They make me think. And apparently, I'm not the only one who thinks so." He nodded toward a red dot that had been placed beside the label for Holiday Erasure. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means someone bought it," I explained, my voice betraying my surprise. The gallery had warned me that as an unknown artist, I shouldn't expect sales from my first show. How much? Derek asked, his financial mind immediately focusing on the practical. I told him the price the gallery had set, a figure that had seemed ambitious to me but that Professor Lowry had insisted was appropriate. Derek's eyebrows shot up. For one photograph? Seriously? It's actually on the lower end for fine art photography, Jackson interjected, a note of defensiveness in his voice. Derek looked at Jackson as if noticing him for the first time. You must be the boyfriend. Jackson, right? Eliza mentioned you. At Christmas. I'm surprised she mentions me at all, considering how little interest your family seems to take in her life. Jackson replied coolly. Jackson, I warned, though part of me appreciated his protectiveness. Derek had the grace to look embarrassed. That's fair. We haven't been attentive, but I'm here now because I want to change that. Before I could respond, a gallery assistant approached, introducing a couple in their 60s who had purchased Holiday Erasure and wanted to meet the artist. For the next 10 minutes, I engaged in conversation with the Hendersons, who explained that the photograph had resonated with their own complicated family dynamics. When they finally moved on, Derek was still waiting, watching me with an expression I'd never seen directed at me before. It took me a moment to recognize it as respect. They really get it, he said, nodding toward the departing couple. Your work, I mean, and they're willing to pay good money for it. Some people are, I acknowledged. It's still a difficult industry to break into. Derek hesitated, then asked, Do you have any other shows coming up, or projects you're working on? The question was so unexpected, so unlike any conversation we'd ever had, that it momentarily threw me. I'm, collaborating with Professor Lowry on a book project, and I've been approached about potentially having some work included in a traveling exhibit on family dynamics in contemporary America. That sounds important, Derek said, and I couldn't detect any condescension in his tone. Listen, I know this is probably too little, too late, but would you consider coming home for the 4th of July? Mom's planning the usual barbecue, and I'd like it if you were there, actually there, not just taking the photos. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs that this was another setup for exclusion. But all I saw was genuine hope, tinged with the awareness that he was asking for more than he deserved. I'll think about it, I promised, neither committing nor refusing outright. As Derek prepared to leave, he paused in front of Holiday Erasure, one last time. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, he said quietly. And I'm proud of you, Eliza. Really proud. After he left, Jackson wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You okay? I wasn't sure how to answer. The evening had been a swirl of contradictory emotions. Pride in my work being recognized, vindication in Derek's acknowledgement of my family's treatment, suspicion about his sudden change of heart, and underneath it all, a faint flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, something was shifting. I think I might be, I finally answered. But I'm also suddenly really clear about what I want to do next. Jackson raised an eyebrow questioningly. I'm going to frame a copy of this, I said, pointing to the red dot beside Holiday Erasure. And I'm going to give it to my parents for their anniversary next month. I'm going to hang it right in their living room, right where everyone who visits will see it. And they'll have to explain over and over why their daughter, the successful New York photographer whose work sells in galleries, isn't in any of their precious family photos. Jackson's smile was slow and appreciative. That, he said, is the perfect revenge. Success and visibility, in a frame they can't ignore. Standing there, surrounded by evidence that my voice mattered, that my perspective was valid, that my art could move strangers to part with their money and my brother, to cross state lines, I felt something settle into place inside me. The little girl who had yearned to be included, who had internalized the message that she didn't quite fit, was finally being seen. And more importantly, she was finally seeing herself clearly, not as the misfit of the Mitchell family, but as Eliza Mitchell, photographer, artist, and a force to be reckoned with. The week following the gallery opening was a whirlwind. 3 more of my photographs sold. Professor Lowry introduced me to her agent, who expressed interest in representing me. And a small but influential art blog published a glowing review of my work, calling it hauntingly authentic and a fresh perspective on family dynamics in the digital age. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I found myself obsessing over my interaction with Derek, analyzing his words and expressions for hidden meanings or ulterior motives. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had made me wary of sudden changes of heart. "You don't trust it," Jackson observed one evening as we sat on the fire escape of my apartment, sharing takeout and watching the sunset paint the neighboring buildings in shades of gold. "Would you?" I countered. "After 22 years of being treated like an inconvenience, am I supposed to believe Derek had some miraculous epiphany because he saw a few photographs?" Jackson considered this. "People do change, Eliza. Sometimes, seeing something familiar from a completely different angle can be transformative." "Maybe," I conceded, pushing my noodles around with my chopsticks. "Or maybe he's just feeling guilty and wants to ease his conscience." "Does his motivation really matter?" Jackson asked. "If the end result is that your family starts including you, isn't that what you wanted?" I set my container down, suddenly not hungry. I wanted them to want me included. I wanted to belong naturally, not because my brother saw my artwork in a fancy New York gallery and realized I might be worth acknowledging. After all, Jackson reached for my hand. "That's fair. Just don't dismiss the possibility of genuine change. People are complicated, families even more so." Over the next few days, I tried to focus on the professional opportunities unfolding before me. Maya Winters, Professor Lowry's agent, wanted to discuss representation. The gallery was interested in including some of my work in a group show scheduled for the fall. And the publisher collaborating with Professor Lowry on her book project had expressed interest in seeing more of my Appalachia photographs. But my thoughts kept returning to Derek's invitation and the anniversary gift I'd impulsively decided to give our parents. Was I ready to re-engage with my family on new terms? Could I trust that they were capable of seeing me differently? And was I willing to risk the disappointment if nothing had actually changed? I decided to test the waters. 3 days after the gallery opening, I sent a group text to my parents and siblings, something I rarely did, with a link to the art blog review and a simple message. Some good news I wanted to share. Abigail responded almost immediately with a string of celebratory emojis and "OMG sis, this is amazing." My father replied an hour later with, "Very impressive, Eliza. Your mother and I are proud of you." And Derek, perhaps unsurprisingly given our recent encounter, sent a private message. "Told you your work was good. Have you thought more about July 4th? My mother's response came the following morning. "How wonderful, dear. We should display one of your photographs in the house. Your father and I would be happy to purchase one from your gallery." I stared at her text for a long time, conflicting emotions swirling through me. On one hand, it was the most direct acknowledgement of my photography as legitimate art that my mother had ever offered. On the other hand, the suggestion that they would purchase my work rather than simply asking for a gift from their daughter felt oddly transactional. I showed the messages to Jackson when he came over that evening. "They're trying," he said after reading them. "In their own awkward way, but they're trying." "My mother wants to buy one of my photographs," I said, still processing the strangeness of it. As if I'm some stranger whose work she admired in a gallery? "Maybe she's trying to show respect for your profession," Jackson suggested. "Offering to pay instead of expecting it for free because you're family." I hadn't considered that interpretation. "That's actually not impossible," I admitted. "So what are you going to do?" I looked at the framed print of Holiday Erasure that I'd already ordered for my parents' anniversary. It had arrived that morning, a stark, beautiful testament to my absence. I'm going to give them the photograph I already planned on, I decided. But maybe not exactly the way I originally intended. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in late June. They had planned a small gathering at their country club, immediate family plus a few close friends. Despite my misgivings, I decided to attend, bringing Jackson for moral support and as a buffer. When we arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club, I was struck by how little had changed. The same understated elegance, the same familiar faces of my parents' friends, the same expectation of appropriate behavior and attire hovering in the air. I smoothed down my simple black dress, conservative by my usual standards, though I'd refused to remove my small nose stud or cover the tattoo on my wrist. "You look beautiful," Jackson reassured me, sensing my sudden self-consciousness. And terrifying, in the best possible way. That made me smile. Good. I want to be taken seriously. We made our way through the cocktail hour with minimal awkwardness. My mother seemed genuinely pleased to meet Jackson. So wonderful to finally put a face to the name. Though I noted her quick assessment of his thrift store blazer and slightly too long hair, my father engaged him in surprisingly genuine conversation about documentary filmmaking, revealing an interest in the subject I hadn't known he possessed. Derek gave me a brief but sincere hug, whispering, "Glad you came," in my ear before returning. To his girlfriend Meredith, who worked at the same financial firm and wore her ambition as visibly as her Cartier watch. Abigail bounced between conversations with her usual social butterfly energy, her diamond engagement ring catching the light as she gesticulated. The perfect Mitchell daughter, about to marry a surgeon and fulfill every expectation our parents had ever had for her. Yet something was different. I noticed it gradually throughout the evening, small moments that didn't fit the established pattern of our family dynamics. My father asking about my upcoming projects with genuine interest. My mother mentioning the blog review to her friends, pride evident in her voice. Derek refilling my wine glass without being asked. Abigail pulling me into conversations rather than leaving me to hover on the periphery. By the time dinner was served, I was thoroughly disoriented by this new version of my family. The wrapped frame containing holiday erasure sat on the gift table alongside boxes from Tiffany and Williams-Sonoma, and I found myself wondering if I'd made a mistake, if my planned statement was too harsh for this tentative new reality. After the main course, my father stood to make a toast, thanking everyone for coming to celebrate their anniversary. He spoke about the joys and challenges of 35 years of marriage, about the family they'd built together, about his love for my mother. Standard anniversary speech fare until he turned to face the three of us, his children. Catherine and I have been blessed with 3 remarkable children, each exceptional in their own way, he said, his voice taking on an unexpected emotional quality. Derek, whose determination and work ethic have always made us proud. Abigail, whose kindness and spirit brighten every room she enters. And Eliza? He paused, looking directly at me. Whose courage to forge her own path, and whose artistic vision have taught us to see the world, and ourselves, more clearly than we might have otherwise. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Around the table, glasses were raised. Congratulatory murmurs rippled through the gathering, and I sat frozen in place, unsure how to process this public acknowledgement that had never before been offered. To Catherine, my father concluded, my wife and partner, who has given me these 3 gifts and countless others over 35 wonderful years. As the toast concluded and dessert was served, I excused myself, needing a moment alone to collect my thoughts. I found a quiet hallway near the restrooms and leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. "You okay?" Derek's voice startled me. I hadn't heard him follow. "Yeah," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "No, maybe. I don't know." Derek leaned against the opposite wall, hands in his pockets. Dad's speech surprised you. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He's been different since I told them about your show, Derek admitted. They both have. It's like, I don't know, like seeing your work made something click for them. What do you mean? Derek shifted uncomfortably. I brought them the gallery, catalog with your artist statement. And I think reading your words about feeling erased from the family, seeing those images of yourself cut out of family scenes, I think it forced them to confront something they'd been doing unconsciously for years. I stared at him. You showed them my work? Before tonight? Was that wrong? Derek looked suddenly uncertain. I thought they should see it, understand it, before your gift. My stomach dropped. You know about the gift? Jackson mentioned you were giving them one of your photographs, Derek explained. He didn't say which one, but I could guess. It's the one from the show, isn't it? The Christmas scene with your silhouette cut out? I nodded slowly, still processing this information. So this whole evening, Dad's toast, Mom bragging about my review, all of it, has been what? Damage control? Getting ahead of the public shaming I planned? No! Derek pushed away from the wall, his expression earnest. It's been genuine, Eliza. They're genuinely proud of you. They're genuinely sorry. They just needed to see themselves, through your eyes, to understand what they'd been doing. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But years of feeling like an afterthought had built sturdy walls around my heart. I need to think, I said, moving past him toward the main room. I need to decide what to do about the gift. Whatever, you decide, Derek said to my retreating back. We deserve it, but we're trying to do better. When I returned to the table, Jackson gave me a questioning look. I shook my head slightly. Not now. The evening proceeded with cake cutting and more. Toasts, my mind elsewhere, weighing options and outcomes. Finally, it was time for gifts. My mother and father sat at the head of the table, opening presents with appropriate expressions of delight and gratitude. Crystal vases, silver picture frames, monogrammed items that would fit seamlessly into their carefully curated home, and then my package was placed before them. This is from Eliza and Jackson, my mother read from the card, smiling at us. With steady hands and a racing heart, I watched as she carefully removed the wrapping paper, revealing the framed photograph. For a moment, there was silence as they took in the image, the Christmas scene with the transparent silhouette where I should have been. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes immediately filling with tears. My father's expression froze, somewhere between shock and pain. This, I said into the uncomfortable silence, my voice stronger than I expected, is one of the pieces from my gallery show. It's called Holiday Erasure. The other guests shifted awkwardly, sensing but not fully understanding the tension. Only our immediate family comprehended the full weight of the moment. It's beautiful work, Eliza, my father finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Painful but beautiful. I had planned to give you this as, I don't know, some kind of statement, I admitted. A way to make visible what I've felt for years, to force you to see what you've done. My mother wiped at her eyes, makeup smudging slightly. We deserve that, she said quietly, echoing Derek's earlier words. But, I continued, reaching into my purse and withdrawing an envelope, I'm also giving you this. I handed the envelope to my father, who opened it with visible confusion. Inside was a certificate for a professional family photo shoot, scheduled for the 4th of July weekend. All of us, I emphasized. A new family portrait, with everyone included. The relief and gratitude that washed across my parents' faces was enough that I'd made the right choice, acknowledging the past while offering a path forward. We would love that, my mother said, fresh tears spilling over. More than you know. Later that night, as Jackson and I drove back to the city, I felt lighter than I had in years, Not because everything was suddenly perfect. One evening couldn't erase decades of feeling excluded, but because for the first time, I felt seen by my family. "You gave them two gifts," Jackson observed as we crossed the bridge back into New York. "The truth and the chance to do better." They gave me something, too, I realized. They admitted they were wrong. They didn't make excuses or try to gaslight me about my experiences. "That's rare," Jackson agreed, "especially for parents." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights growing closer, before I spoke again. "I'm still hanging." "The photograph in their house, though," Jackson laughed. "Of course you are. It's too powerful not to display. But now it can be a reminder of where we've been," I said. "Not just an accusation. A marker of the moment things started to change." The 4th of July weekend arrived with sweltering heat and the peculiar nervousness of stepping into a new chapter with my family. I'd spent the intervening weeks immersed in work, finalizing my contract with Maya Winters for representation and beginning preliminary discussions about a solo show of my own the following spring. My parents had texted regularly, brief, slightly awkward messages that nevertheless represented more consistent communication than we'd had in years. Abigail had called twice to discuss the photo shoot, fretting about coordinating outfits. "Nothing matching, Abby, I'm begging you," and locations. Even Derek checked in occasionally, usually with succinct texts like, "You good?" or "Still coming next weekend?" When Jackson and I arrived at my parents' house the day before the scheduled photo shoot, the first thing I noticed was holiday erasure, prominently displayed in the living room above the fireplace, exactly where family photos had always hung, but now occupied by the stark evidence of my previous exclusion. "Your mother insisted," my father explained when he caught me staring at it. "She said it belonged where everyone would see it and remember." The weekend unfolded with surprising ease. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. My mother's instinctive criticism of my casual attire for the country club brunch, my father's raised eyebrow at Jackson's political opinions, my own defensive reactions to innocent comments. But beneath these surface frictions was a new foundation of effort and awareness on all sides. The photo shoot itself took place on the actual 4th, in the backyard garden my mother had meticulously maintained for decades. The photographer, a former colleague of mine from school who had established a successful portrait business, arranged us in natural groupings, formal and informal shots, serious and silly poses, various combinations of family members. "Everyone look at Eliza," she directed at one point, positioning me in the center of the family group. As 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me, my parents, Derek and his girlfriend, Abigail and her fiancé, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until later, reviewing the digital proofs on the photographer's laptop, that I recognized it. Belonging. There I was, unmistakably present, unmistakably seen, unmistakably part of the Mitchell family. Not erased, not sidelined, not behind. The camera, but in the frame, where I had always wanted to be. "This one," my mother said decisively, pointing to a candid shot of all of us laughing, my head thrown back in genuine mirth, my father's arm around my shoulders. "This is the one for the Christmas card this year." 2 weeks later, after we'd returned to New York and resumed our regular lives, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a framed copy of that same photograph, along with a handwritten note from my mother. "For your wall. So you never forget that you are, and always have been, an essential part of this family. Even when we failed to show it properly. Love, Mom." I hung it in my studio, directly opposite my workstation, where I would see it every day. A reminder, not just of where I belonged, but of the power of making yourself impossible to ignore, of framing your success where even those who once overlooked you can't possibly miss it. 3 months later, when my first solo exhibition opened, the entire Mitchell family was there, front and center, proudly introducing themselves to the art world as Eliza's family. And when the photographers from several prominent art blogs asked for a group photo, no one suggested I should be the one behind the camera. Instead, we stood together, a visibly imperfect but genuinely connected family, with me right in the middle of the frame, exactly where I belonged. 1 year after my solo exhibition, my career had taken on a momentum that sometimes left me breathless. The show had received positive reviews in several art publications, which led to inquiries from galleries in Chicago, Los Angeles, and even London. Maya, my agent, had negotiated a book deal for a collection of my work focused on visibility and family dynamics, and Professor Lowry had recommended me for a prestigious teaching position at our alma mater. "You've officially made it," Jackson said one evening as we celebrated the news that one of my photographs had been acquired by the Whitney Museum for their permanent collection. We were sitting on the rooftop of our new apartment in Brooklyn, a significant upgrade from my previous cramped studio, with actual space for both of us to work comfortably. "I don't know about made it," I demurred, though privately I was still stunned by the museum acquisition. "But things are definitely moving in the right direction." "Are you kidding? The Whitney, Eliza. The Whitney." Jackson refilled our glasses with champagne. "Not to mention the book deal, the teaching gig, and oh yeah, the fact that your work is currently hanging in 3 different countries." I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. Jackson had been by my side through every step of this journey, his support never wavering even as my increasingly demanding schedule meant less time for us. He'd recently completed his first documentary, a thoughtful exploration of gentrification in Brooklyn neighborhoods, and had received promising feedback from several film festivals. "We've both had a good year," I acknowledged, raising my glass to his. "To making art that matters." "To making art that matters," he echoed, clinking his glass against mine. As we sat watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in vibrant hues, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed, not just professionally, but personally. My relationship with my family had evolved into something I wouldn't have recognized 2 years earlier. Regular phone calls, group texts, sharing both mundane daily happenings and significant milestones. Visits that, while still occasionally tense, were now genuinely enjoyable more often than not. The framed family photograph my mother had sent me had been joined by several others. Holiday gatherings, Abigail's wedding, casual moments captured, during weekend visits, and in each one, there I was, undeniably present, undeniably part of the Mitchell family. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jackson asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about how strange life is," I said. 2 years ago, I was using my photography to document how excluded I felt from my family. Now I'm using it to capture how connected we've become. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Full circle in the best possible way." "It's not perfect," I clarified. "Mom still makes those little comments about my creative style choices. Dad still occasionally slips and talks about my career like it's a fortunate accident rather than the result of hard work and talent. But they're trying," Jackson finished for me. "And so are you." "I guess that's all any of us can do," I agreed. "Try to be better today than we were yesterday." The following week brought a new opportunity, one that would test just how much my family dynamic had truly changed. The Museum of Modern Art was organizing a special exhibition titled Family Frames: Contemporary Perspectives on Kinship and Identity. The curator, Sophia Chen, had seen my work at the Whitney and reached out to discuss including several pieces in the exhibition. "We're particularly interested in your Absence-Presence series," she explained during our meeting at the museum. "The way you explore the tension between being physically present but emotionally erased within a family context resonates strongly with the themes of our exhibition." I felt a complex mix of emotions at her words. The Absence-Presence series included holiday erasure and several similar works that explicitly documented my experience of exclusion from family photographs. While I was honored by the interest from such a prestigious institution, I was also aware that including these works would mean publicly displaying my family's past behavior in one of the most visited museums in the world. The exhibition opens in September, Sophia continued, and will run for 4 months. We would feature a minimum of 5 pieces from your series, with an extended artist statement explaining the personal context of the work. I'm definitely interested, I told her, but I need some time to consider. These particular pieces involve my family in a very direct way, and our relationship has evolved significantly since I created them. Sophia nodded understandingly. Of course, this type of work often involves complex personal considerations. Take the time you need. On the subway ride home, I wrestled with conflicting impulses. Professionally, this was an incredible opportunity. Exposure at MoMA could catapult my career to even greater heights. But personally, I worried about reopening wounds that had begun to heal. Would my family see this as a betrayal, a public airing of private grievances despite our reconciliation? Or would they understand that my art needed to exist independently from our current relationship? That evening, I called my mother. Something that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier for a matter this sensitive. MoMA wants to exhibit some of my work, I said, after we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. Eliza, that's wonderful. Her enthusiasm sounded genuine. The Museum of Modern Art. Your father and I visited there just last month. To think your photographs will be displayed there. It's the Absence Presence series, I clarified, heart pounding. The ones about being excluded from family photos. A brief silence followed. Then, oh, I wanted to talk to you about it before making a decision, I explained. These works represent a difficult period in our relationship, and I'm concerned about how you and Dad might feel having that on display now that things between us have improved. Another pause, longer this time. When my mother spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Your art is your truth, Eliza, she said finally. Those photographs capture a real experience you had, one that your father and I caused, however unintentionally. We don't get to ask you to hide that truth just because it makes us uncomfortable. Her response was so unexpected, so mature, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Mom, Besides, she continued with a hint of her characteristic practicality, it's the Museum of Modern Art. You can't possibly turn that down. I laughed, tension breaking. That's definitely a factor. Tell them yes, my mother said firmly. And let us know when the opening is. We'll be there. You don't have to. We want to, she interrupted. All of us do. Derek already mentioned booking a hotel for whenever your next big exhibition might be. And Abigail has been not so subtly hinting that she's never been to MoMA. The thought of my entire family at the opening, standing beside me as visitors viewed photographic evidence of how they had once excluded me, was both terrifying and oddly perfect. A public acknowledgement of both where we had been and how far we had come. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. Over the following months, as I worked with Sophia and her team on selecting and preparing the pieces for the exhibition, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. From the angry, hurt young woman who had planned to give her parents a guilt-inducing anniversary gift to the established artist whose work would hang in one of the world's most prestigious museums, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. You've changed, Jackson observed one night as I finalized my artist statement for the exhibition catalog. Not just professionally, but personally. How so? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. You're more secure, he said, after considering his words carefully. When I first met you, so much of your identity was wrapped up in being the outsider, the one who didn't fit in with your family. Now you seem comfortable with who you are, whether you're with them or not. His observation resonated deeply. For years, I had defined myself in opposition to my family. If they were conventional, I would be unconventional. If they valued conformity, I would embrace rebellion. But somewhere along the way, as they had made space for me to be authentically myself, I had stopped needing to push against them to maintain my identity. I think you're right, I acknowledged. I used to need them to see me as different. Now I just need them to see me. September arrived more quickly than seemed possible, bringing with it the opening of family frames at MoMA. Maya had skillfully built anticipation for my participation, arranging interviews with several art publications and securing a feature in the New York Times Arts section that included a prominently displayed image of holiday erasure. The evening of the VIP preview, I stood in the gallery, surrounded by the work of 20 contemporary photographers exploring various aspects of family dynamics. My section featured 7 pieces from the Absence Presence series, including the original holiday erasure on loan from the private collectors who had purchased it, along with my new artist statement explaining the personal context and subsequent reconciliation that had informed the work. These photographs document a specific period in my relationship with my family, the statement read in part. They represent not just absence, but the yearning for presence, the desire to be seen, included, and valued as an integral part of a family narrative. Since creating these images, my relationship with my family has evolved significantly, proving that recognition and reconciliation are possible even after years of disconnect. These works now stand as markers of a journey, rather than an endpoint, reminders that family relationships, like photographs themselves, can be reframed and viewed from new perspectives. As guests began to arrive for the preview, I felt unusually nervous. My work had been displayed in major exhibitions before, but never with such personal context, and never with my family in attendance. What if seeing the photographs in this prestigious setting reignited old tensions? What if the public nature of the display proved too much for our still healing relationship? "They're here," Jackson murmured, nodding toward the entrance. I turned to see my entire family walking in together. My parents, Derek and his now-fiancée Meredith, Abigail and her husband Thomas. They were dressed elegantly but not ostentatiously, looking slightly out of place among the art world denizens but holding themselves with quiet dignity. "I'll get them some champagne," Jackson offered, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze before making his way toward the bar. I watched as my family approached, noticing how they moved as a unit, unconsciously adjusting their pace to stay together. When had that happened? When had they become so attuned to each other's movements, so careful not to leave anyone behind? "Eliza," my father said warmly as they reached me, pulling me into a brief but genuine hug. "This is quite something." "The museum is incredible," my mother added, glancing around with appreciative eyes. "And to think your work is displayed here?" "We haven't seen your section yet," Derek explained. "We wanted to view it with you." The simple consideration of that gesture, wanting to experience my work alongside me rather than forming their opinions in private, spoke volumes about how our dynamic had shifted. "I'd like that," I said, suddenly feeling emotional. "Just remember that these photographs represent how I felt then, not how I feel now." "We know," Abigail assured me, linking her arm through mine. "Lead the way, famous artist sister." Together, we walked through the exhibition until we reached my section. I held my breath as my family took in the 7 photographs that documented, in stark visual terms, how I had once felt erased from our shared history. My father stood longest before holiday erasure, studying it with an intensity that made me nervous. "It's even more powerful in this context," he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "Seeing it alongside these other works, it tells a story that goes beyond just our family." "That's what art is supposed to do, isn't it?" my mother observed, surprising me with her insight. "Take something personal and make it universal." "I think what Mom's trying to say Derek interjected with a hint of his old teasing manner, is that you've managed to turn our family dysfunction into high art. Congratulations. We all laughed, the tension breaking. Even in this serious moment, surrounded by evidence of past pain, we had found a way to authentically ourselves together. Imperfect, occasionally awkward, but fundamentally connected. As the evening progressed, I watched my family interact with other attendees, explaining their relationship to me with evident pride, answering questions about the photographs with remarkable candor, even posing for a group photo requested by a journalist from an art magazine. The formerly excluded photographer, now centered in her family narrative, the journalist remarked as she positioned us for the shot. And in the frame, my mother added pointedly, making sure I was situated in the middle of the group. Later, as we gathered for dinner at a nearby restaurant, I found myself seated between my father and Jackson, surrounded by the animated conversation of my family discussing the exhibition, the other photographers' work, and the various art world personalities. They'd observed. I keep thinking about your artist statement, my father said quietly, turning to me while the others were engaged in a lively debate about one of the more experimental photographers, particularly the part about reframing and new perspectives. What about it? I asked. It made me realize that's exactly what your work did for us, he explained. It reframed how we saw our family, forced us to view our behavior from a new perspective. That's powerful, Eliza. Not many people can do that with their art. The simple acknowledgement brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Thank you. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner, he continued, his voice taking on a rare emotional quality, that it took having your work exhibited in a gallery for us to really see you. Better late than never, I offered, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant it. My father nodded, reaching for his water glass to cover what looked suspiciously like tears forming in his eyes. Your mother and I are very proud of you. Not just because your work is hanging in museums, though that's certainly impressive, but because of who you are. How you've helped us become better, more thoughtful people. Across the table, I caught my mother watching us, a soft smile on her face. When our eyes met, she raised her glass slightly in a private toast, and I knew she shared my father's sentiment. The following morning, as Jackson and I had coffee on our rooftop before heading to the exhibition's public opening, I found myself in a reflective mood once again. Last night was a milestone, wasn't it? Jackson observed, sensitive as always to my emotional state. In more ways than one, I agreed. Professional success is one thing, but having my family there, actually seeing and appreciating my work, that's something I never thought would happen. From exclusion to center stage, Jackson mused. It's poetic. Life rarely ties up that neatly, I cautioned. We still have our moments. Mom still doesn't understand why I won't wear something more flattering. Dad still sometimes introduces me as our daughter the photographer, with that slight questioning tone. But they're in the gallery now, Jackson pointed out. Not just looking at the pictures, but understanding them. That's progress. As we prepared to leave for the museum, my phone chimed with a new email notification. It was from Sophia, the curator, with a subject line that made me pause. NY Times Review. Congratulations! I opened it to find a link to that morning's review of the exhibition, with the critic singling out my work for particular praise. Mitchell's Absence-Presence series offers perhaps the most emotionally resonant exploration of family dynamics in the exhibition. Her photographs of family scenes with her own silhouette conspicuously absent speak to universal experiences of exclusion and longing for belonging, while her artist statement's revelation of subsequent reconciliation adds a hopeful dimension, often missing in contemporary explorations of family trauma. In Mitchell's work, we see not just the pain of being unseen within one's own family, but the possibility of healing through honest confrontation and mutual growth. I read the review, aloud to Jackson, my voice wavering slightly at the personal significance behind the professional recognition. "That's perfect," he said when I finished. "Absolutely perfect." Without conscious thought, I found myself forwarding the review to my family group chat, something I wouldn't have hesitated to do with friends, but that would have been unthinkable with my family just 2 years earlier. The responses came quickly. From Abigail: "So proud of you. Best review ever." From Derek: "Nailed it. The critic obviously gets what makes your work special." From my father: "Exceptional review for exceptional work. Your mother is already calling everyone we know." And finally, from my mother: "The Times is absolutely right about your work, Eliza. But they missed one important thing: how your art not only shows the possibility of healing, but actually created it for our family. We love you and couldn't be prouder." As Jackson and I headed to the subway, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the hurt child excluded from family photos to the accomplished artist whose work hung in major museums. From the angry young woman planning to frame her success where her family couldn't miss it, to the confident adult who no longer needed external validation to know her worth. I had achieved exactly what I'd set out to do: force my family to see me, to acknowledge my success, to regret their exclusion. But somewhere along the way, my goal had transformed from revenge to reconciliation, from forcing recognition to fostering genuine connection. The irony wasn't lost on me. In framing my exclusion, I had ultimately created space for inclusion. In documenting absence, I had made room for presence. And in sharing my pain through art, I had opened the door to healing, not just for myself, but for my entire family. As we emerged from the subway near the museum, I could see the MoMA banners, announcing the Family Frames exhibition, my name among those featured. Inside, visitors would view my work, read my story, perhaps recognize something of their own family dynamics in my images. But most importantly, my family had seen me, truly seen me, at last. And in the frame or out, behind the camera or in front of it, that recognition was the most meaningful success I could have achieved. 5 years after the MoMA exhibition, my life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. My career had continued its upward trajectory, a retrospective of my work at the Guggenheim, a prestigious fellowship that allowed me to document family structures across different cultures, and a permanent teaching position at one of New York's top art schools. But the most significant changes were personal. Jackson and I had married in a small ceremony in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, with my family not just present but actively involved, my father walking me down the aisle, my mother helping plan the reception, Abigail as my maid of honor, and Derek standing as one of Jackson's groomsmen. The wedding photos, taken by a former student of mine, captured a family fully integrated, with no silhouettes or absences to be found. We had also welcomed our daughter, Lily, now 3 years old and already showing signs of her parents' creative tendencies, her finger paintings proudly displayed alongside my exhibition catalogs and Jackson's Film Festival awards. "She has your eye," my mother observed during a weekend visit to our brownstone and Park Slope, watching as Lily carefully arranged her stuffed animals for what she called a family picture. "And your organizational skills," I replied with a smile, noting how meticulously my daughter positioned each toy. The relationship between my parents and Lily had been a revelation. From the moment of her birth, they had embraced grandparenthood with an openness and warmth that sometimes made me wistful for what my own childhood might have been. My father read her stories for hours, his patience seemingly infinite. My mother taught her simple baking techniques, delighting in the mess rather than fretting about it as she had when I was young. "They're different with her," I remarked to Derek during a quiet moment at Thanksgiving dinner, watching as our parents helped Lily create a handprint turkey at the kids' table they'd set up specially for her and Derek's twin boys. "They're different. People now, Derek pointed out. We all are. He was right. The journey we'd been through, from exclusion to reconciliation to genuine connection, had changed all of us, perhaps my parents most of all. They had learned to embrace differences rather than enforce conformity, to celebrate individuality rather than suppress it. The evidence hung on their living room wall, where Holiday Erasure now shared space with a vibrant gallery of diverse family photographs, formal portraits alongside candid shots, professional images beside phone snapshots, all displaying the full Mitchell family in various combinations and settings. The visual history they had once curated so carefully to present a perfect facade had been replaced by an authentic representation of our messy, complex family reality. That Christmas, my parents suggested something unexpected, recreating the original Christmas photo from Holiday Erasure, but with everyone included. A before and after, my father explained when I looked skeptical, to mark how far we've come. So on Christmas Eve, we arranged ourselves in front of the fireplace, wearing not matching sweaters but clothes that expressed our individual styles. My mother set up the tripod and we all squeezed into the frame, parents, siblings, spouses, children, even the family dog. A chaotic, joyful contrast to the sterile perfection of the original image. Everyone say, "Mitchell family," my mother called as the timer counted down. The resulting photograph captured something real. My father's arm around my shoulders, Lily perched on my lap, reaching toward her cousins, Derek making bunny ears behind Abigail's head, my mother laughing instead of maintaining her once customary posed smile. Imperfect, unruly, genuine. Later that evening, as the house grew quiet with children asleep and most adults relaxing in the living room, my mother found me in the kitchen, washing dishes despite her protests that it could wait until morning. "I've been thinking about commissioning a piece," she said, picking up a towel to dry the wine glasses. "Something for the entryway." "What kind of piece?" I asked, curious about this unexpected foray into art patronage. "A photograph," she replied. "Or perhaps a series of photographs. About transformation. About how families evolve." I raised an eyebrow. "Any particular photographer in mind?" "I was hoping my daughter might be interested," she said with a small smile. "She has a unique perspective on our family history." The proposal touched me deeply. This wasn't just my mother appreciating my work in the abstract. This was her actively seeking my artistic interpretation of our shared experience, acknowledging the value of my perspective. "I'd be honored," I told her. "But I should warn you, artists don't always create what clients expect." "I'm counting on that," she replied, her expression suddenly serious. "I don't want what I expect, Eliza. I want what you see." Over the following months, I worked on the commissioned series, diving deep into family archives, interviewing relatives about their memories, and creating new images that juxtaposed past and present. The project became not just a gift for my mother, but an exploration of how families write and rewrite their narratives across generations. The series, which I titled Reframing, was installed in my parents' entryway that summer. 5 large-format photographs that trace the evolution of the Mitchell family through subtle visual metaphors and carefully constructed compositions. The centerpiece was a triptych showing 3 versions of the same family grouping. The original Christmas photo with my absence, the MoMA exhibition opening with me centered in the family circle, and the chaotic, joyful Christmas portrait from the previous year. "It's perfect," my mother said softly when she saw the completed installation. "Exactly what this house needed." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Truth," she answered simply. "This house was always so concerned with appearances, with presenting the right image. Your work reminds us to value substance over surface." Coming from the woman who had once orchestrated family photographs with military precision and excluded me for disrupting her perfect vision, this statement represented a profound transformation. That fall, as I prepared for a major international exhibition that would tour museums in London, Tokyo, and Sydney, I received an unexpected email from a young photography student at my alma mater. She had seen my work at MoMA's permanent collection and was writing a thesis on visual representations of family exclusion. "Your Absence-Presence series resonated deeply with me," she wrote. "As someone who has always felt like an outsider in my own family, seeing your work gave me hope that artistic expression can lead to understanding and potentially healing. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about how creating these images affected your relationship with your family?" I sat with the email for a while, thinking about how to respond. 5 years earlier, I might have focused on the pain and resentment that had fueled the original images. But now, with the perspective of time and genuine reconciliation, I saw a different story to tell. My reply began, "The interesting thing about documenting exclusion is that it paradoxically creates inclusion. The very act of showing where you've been erased makes your presence impossible to ignore. In my case, framing my absence ultimately led to my family reframing how they saw me, and perhaps more importantly, how they saw themselves in relation to me." I went on to explain how the public display of private pain had created space for honest conversation, how my professional success had demanded recognition, but also offered my family a way to support me that felt genuine rather than forced, and how the journey from exclusion to inclusion had required growth and change on all sides. "The photographs hanging in museums matter," I concluded. "But the real transformation is evidenced by the photographs now hanging in my parents' home. Images where everyone is included, where differences are celebrated rather than suppressed, where family is defined by connection rather than conformity." After sending the email, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected path my life had taken. The hurt child who had been systematically excluded from family photos had grown into an artist whose work exploring that very exclusion now hung in major museums around the world. The angry young woman who had planned to frame her success where her family couldn't miss it had discovered that true success wasn't about forcing recognition, but about creating space for genuine connection. In framing my absence, I had ultimately made my presence impossible to ignore. In documenting exclusion, I had created the possibility of inclusion, and in sharing my pain through art, I had opened the door to healing, not just for myself, but for my entire family. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, she asked for her favorite bedtime story, not a fairy tale from a book, but the true story of how her mother had turned pain into art and exclusion into belonging. It was a story I never tired of telling her, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do when we feel unseen is to frame that invisibility and hang it where everyone must look at it, to transform absence into presence through the simple, radical act of telling our truth. 10 years after the photograph that changed everything, I found myself standing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art at the opening of my largest exhibition to date. Visible, Invisible, a decade of seeing and being. Seen. The retrospective spanned my entire career, from early student work to my most recent series, tracing the evolution of my artistic vision and the personal journey that had informed it. At 42, I had achieved more professional success than I had ever imagined possible. My work was part of permanent collections in major museums worldwide. I had published 3 books, won numerous awards, and mentored dozens of emerging photographers through my position as department chair at one of New York's most prestigious art schools. The girl who had once been literally erased from her family's visual history was now immortalized in the canon of contemporary photography. But as I moved through the crowded galleries that evening, greeting collectors, critics, and fellow artists, my greatest sense of accomplishment came not from the institutional recognition, but from glimpsing my family scattered throughout the exhibition space. My parents explaining the context of certain images to curious attendees, Abigail and Derek good-naturedly debating the merits of different pieces. Jackson supervising our children as they participated in the interactive portion of the installation. Lily, now 13 and already showing remarkable talent as a photographer herself, was solemnly leading her younger brother James and their cousins through the exhibition, offering her own interpretations of my work with the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by art and artists. "She's got your eye, but her father's flair for drama," observed a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Professor Lowry, Diana now, after years of friendship and collaboration, watching Lily, with amusement. "The best of both worlds," I agreed, smiling as my daughter gestured expansively while explaining a particularly abstract piece to her captive audience of younger children. "You've come a long way from that angry young student with the self-portrait series," Diana remarked, linking her arm through mine as we moved away from the crowd toward a quieter corner of the gallery. "Sometimes I barely recognize that person," I admitted. "The hurt, the resentment, the desperate need to prove myself. It seems so distant now." "And yet," Diana countered, "without that angry young woman and her determination to be seen, none of this would exist." She gestured toward the exhibition stretching through multiple gallery rooms. "Pain can be a powerful creative catalyst. As long as you don't get stuck in it," I added. "That's the lesson I try to teach my students. Use the difficult experiences, mine them for their creative potential, but don't let them define you forever." Diana nodded approvingly. "Speaking of students, I met that young woman you've been mentoring, Zoe Reynolds. Remarkable talent." "She reminds me of myself," I acknowledged. "Complicated family dynamics, using photography to process her experiences, but she's got something special, a visual language that's entirely her own. The way she captures tension in seemingly mundane domestic scenes is extraordinary," Diana agreed. "Reminds me a bit of your early work, but with her own distinct perspective." Our conversation was interrupted by the approach of the museum director, who needed to escort me to the podium for the official welcome and remarks. As I moved through the crowd, I caught my mother's eye across the room. She gave me a small, private smile, one that conveyed pride, love, and a shared understanding of the journey that had brought us here. The formal part of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, applause, and photographs. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my remarks brief, thanking the museum, my colleagues, my agent, and finally, my family. "Art doesn't exist in a vacuum," I concluded, looking directly at my parents, siblings, husband, and children. "It's shaped by our experiences, our relationships, our struggles, and our moments of connection. My work has always been, in one way or another, about what it means to be seen and unseen within the contexts that define us. I've been fortunate to have a family willing to see me, even when that meant confronting uncomfortable truths about our shared past. And I've been equally fortunate to have found an artistic community that valued my unique perspective. To everyone who has been part of this journey, thank you for seeing me." Later, as the evening wound down and only a few lingering guests remained, I found my father standing alone before the centerpiece of the exhibition, an installation that juxtaposed holiday erasure with a series of subsequent family photographs showing my gradual reintegration, culminating in a recent image of our extended family gathered at the beach house we now rented every summer. "Quite a story these tell," he commented as I joined him. "Our story," I agreed. "For better or worse." My father was silent for a moment, studying the progression of images. "Mostly better, I think. At least in the end." "The end?" I teased gently. "I plan to keep making photographs for a long time, Dad." "You know what I mean," he replied with a soft smile. "The end of that particular chapter. The exclusion chapter." I nodded, understanding. "It made for compelling art, at least." "That's one way of looking at it," my father acknowledged, "though I sometimes wonder what might have been different if we'd seen you, really seen you, from the beginning." It was a question that had occurred to me as well over the years. Would I have become the same photographer without the experience of exclusion? Would my artistic voice have found the same resonance? Would the pain that had fueled my early work have transformed into the more nuanced explorations of visibility and connection that had defined my later career? I used to think about that a lot, I admitted. Whether I succeeded because of the exclusion or in spite of it. But I've come to believe it's not that simple. We're all shaped by our experiences, the painful ones and the joyful ones. What matters is what we create from them. My father considered this, then nodded slowly. You created something remarkable. Not just the art, but the change. In yourself, in our family. We all did, I corrected gently. It wasn't just me forcing my way into the frame. It was all of us learning to create a new picture together. As we rejoined the rest of the family, I was struck by how naturally we now moved as a unit. Not the forced togetherness of those early Mitchell family photographs with their matching outfits and rigid poses, but an organic connection that allowed for individual expression within a collective identity. Later that night, after the children had been put to bed in our Brooklyn brownstone and Jackson had fallen asleep reading his latest script, I found myself drawn to my home studio, where selected prints from the exhibition were laid out on my work table. Sitting in the pool of light from my desk lamp, I traced the visual evidence of my journey from excluded daughter to celebrated artist, from angry young woman to content middle-aged professional. The phone call came just as I was about to turn off the light and join Jackson in bed. Seeing my mother's name on the caller ID at such a late hour sent a momentary jolt of concern through me. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she assured me quickly. "I'm sorry to call so late. I couldn't sleep without telling you something." "What is it?" I asked, settling back into my studio chair. "Your exhibition today. Seeing all your work displayed like that, the full scope of what you've accomplished. It made me realize something." She paused, and I could hear the slight waver in her voice that indicated she was emotional. "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For not giving up on us," she said simply. "You had every reason to walk away from this family, Eliza. To cut ties and never look back. We excluded you, dismissed your passion, failed to see you in all the ways that mattered. But instead of just leaving, you demanded to be seen. You created art that forced us to confront our behavior. And when we finally began to see you, really see you, you gave us the chance to make amends." I sat with her words, feeling their weight and truth. I almost did give up, I admitted. There were times when it seemed easier to just accept the exclusion, to build a life completely separate from the family. "What changed your mind?" my mother asked softly. I thought back to that pivotal moment in my studio apartment years ago, staring at the framed print of holiday erasure that I'd ordered for my parents' anniversary. I realized that walking away would mean they won, I explained. That the exclusion would be complete, and something in me refused to accept that ending. "I'm grateful for your stubbornness," my mother said, with a hint of her customary wry humor. "It's what saved us from ourselves." After we said our goodnights, I sat for a while longer in my quiet studio, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The Metropolitan Museum retrospective represented a pinnacle of professional achievement, but the real triumph lay in the transformed relationships that now defined my life. The family that had learned to see me, the husband who had supported me through every step of the journey, the children who were growing up secure in the knowledge that they would always be seen and valued for exactly who they were. The following weekend, we gathered at my parents' house for a post-exhibition celebration dinner. Over the years, their home had transformed alongside our relationship. The formal living room with its careful arrangements and pristine surfaces had given way to a comfortable, lived-in space filled with evidence of their grandchildren's frequent visits. Photographs lined the walls in eclectic groupings: family, portraits interspersed with candid shots, professional images alongside amateur snapshots, and in the entryway, the reframing series I had created for my mother years earlier still commanded attention, though now it had been expanded with additional images marking significant family moments: Lily's birth, James's adoption, my father's retirement, the beach house summer gatherings that had become our most cherished tradition. As we settled around, the dining table, now scarred with evidence of art projects and holiday celebrations, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To Eliza," he began, whose determination to be seen changed not just her own life, but all of ours. "And to family," my mother added, in all its complicated, imperfect glory. "To growth," Derek contributed, glancing meaningfully around the table. "And the courage to change." "To art," Abigail chimed in, raising her glass higher. "And its power to reveal truth." "To belonging," Jackson offered, his eyes meeting mine with the deep understanding that comes from years of partnership. "In whatever form it takes." As glasses clinked and conversation flowed, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of this scene, a family dinner that would have been unimaginable in my youth, filled with genuine connection, mutual respect, and the easy comfort of being fully seen and accepted. Later, as the children played in the backyard and the adults lingered over coffee, Lily appeared at my side with her camera, the professional grade model her grandparents had given her for her last birthday. "Mom," she said urgently, "I need everyone for a picture before the light changes." We dutifully assembled on the back patio, arranging ourselves without direction, finding our natural places within the family constellation. "Everyone look at each other," Lily instructed, surprising us with this unconventional direction. "Not at me. Look at each other." The resulting photograph, which would eventually become one of my most treasured possessions, captured something profound about our family's transformation. Instead of the forced smiles directed at the camera that had characterized the Mitchell family photos of my youth, this image showed us genuinely engaged with one another, laughing, connecting, present in the moment and with each other. When Lily showed us the image on her camera's display, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "That's it," she said softly. "That's what was missing all those years ago. We were so concerned with how we looked to others that we forgot to actually see each other." Her insight struck me as the perfect distillation of our family's journey, from performance to authenticity, from projection to connection, from exclusion to belonging. As summer faded into fall, I found myself incorporating Lily's photograph into my teaching, using it as an example of how the most powerful images often capture genuine moments of human connection rather than carefully constructed scenes. The history of photography is full of images meant to document, to record, to preserve moments in time, I explained to my advanced seminar students. But the most resonant photographs go beyond documentation to reveal something authentic about human experience, something true about how we relate to each other and the world around us. After class, a student approached me, a quiet young woman whose portfolio showed remarkable sensitivity and depth. "Professor Mitchell," she began hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you for sharing your personal story through your work, the Absence Presence series. It helped me understand something about my own family dynamics." Her words reminded me of the email I'd received years earlier from another young photographer who had connected with my work. The realization that my personal journey continued to resonate with others, that my specific experience of exclusion and eventual belonging spoke to something universal, filled me with a profound sense of purpose. "That's why we make art," I told her, "to transform our individual experiences into something that connects us to others, to make the invisible visible, to find meaning in our struggles and share that meaning with the world." As I packed up my materials at the end of the day, I thought about how far I had come from that angry young woman determined to frame her success where her family couldn't miss it. The revenge I had once sought, the vindication, the forced recognition, had evolved into something infinitely more valuable: genuine connection, mutual respect, and the shared joy of creating new family narratives together. The photograph that now hung above the fireplace in my parents' living room, Lily's masterful capture of our family seeing each other rather than performing for an external gaze, represented not the end of our story, but its continuing evolution. We were still learning, still growing, still finding new ways to see and be seen by one another. And in my own living room, a carefully curated gallery wall traced this evolution through a series of images, beginning with holiday erasure, that stark documentation of exclusion that had once hung in museums around the world, and culminating in the most recent family portraits showing 3 generations connected by both blood and choice, by shared history and mutual respect. The third journey from invisible to visible, from excluded to included, from unseen to celebrated had transformed not just my place within the family, but the very nature of the family itself. In framing my absence, I had created the possibility of a more authentic presence, not just for myself, but for all of us. And perhaps that was the most powerful form of success I could have framed. Not the museum exhibitions or critical acclaim, but the creation of a family where everyone was seen, valued, and given space to be authentically themselves within the larger frame of belonging. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.